In 1987, Apple demoed a touchscreen tablet with video chat and an agentic AI, decades before the iPad and ChatGPT. In fact, the web hadn't been invented yet, and most people had never even sent an email. The one wrinkle? It didn't actually exist. This is the story of Apple's Knowledge Navigator, which kicked off an entire genre of corporate speculative design and sparked a kind of holy war among researchers as to whether people should manipulate machines directly or relinquish control to AI assistants, and whether the latter is even possible without surrendering ourselves to a kind of surveillance state where every action we take is monitored, cataloged, and indexed. This story is still playing out nearly 4 decades later, but it begins with John Sculley, who needed to prove that Apple could innovate just as well without Steve Jobs, whose new company Next was threatening to eat their lunch in the higher education market. So when Sculley took the stage at EduCom in the fall of 1987, the most important conference in that very market, he needed something dazzling. He wanted to show the world that Apple, without Steve Jobs, could still see the future. Sculley needed a good concept, and he leaned on the brilliance and vision of Alan Kay, the Apple fellow he'd been turning to for guidance on where computing was headed. Kay had helped shape the later chapters of Sculley's recent book Odyssey, which, in between the story of his rise from sugar water salesman to the top of Apple, looks ahead into the future of knowledge work. One of Kay's concepts that really resonated with Sculley was the Dynabook. Kay had first sketched the idea back in the late 1960s and published it in 1972, before Xerox's Alto, the first computer with a graphical interface, had even shipped. Kay described it as a personal computer for children of all ages, almost like a portable Memex. Building on top of Dynabook, Sculley's Odyssey imagines, with the help of Kay, something called the Knowledge Navigator. Like the Memex, the Knowledge Navigator is an attempt to answer an emerging problem of the 20th century: information overload. The Knowledge Navigator would be our vehicle, our ship in the sea of information. It would consist of 5 enabling technologies. 1. Advanced communications. Global networks linking processors and databases from homes to universities. Basically universal internet access. 2. Graphic simulations. Real-time 3D graphics that could visualize abstract relationships. 3. Object-oriented databases. A kind of global, malleable knowledge graph. 4. Hypermedia. The ability to create a trail of links and connections through text, photo, sound, and video. And 5. Artificial intelligence. And it's here that things get particularly prescient. AI had of course already existed in fiction. HAL in 2001, the Star Trek computer. But what Sculley lays out with the Knowledge Navigator is remarkably close to where we've ended up today. There was just one problem. The future didn't exist yet. The tablet, the network, the agentic AI, this couldn't be built in 1987, or even in a decade. Certainly not in the 6 weeks they had until the presentation. So Sculley did the only thing he could do. He faked it. But even that wouldn't be as easy as you might think. In 1987, there was no Photoshop, no After Effects. To create on-screen visuals, the team turned to a high-end system called the Quantel Paintbox, a mainstay of broadcast television that could cost as much as $250,000 at the time. The tablet itself was constructed from balsa wood in just over a week. In what would prove to be a momentous decision, the team anthropomorphized the software agent as a kind of bow-tied butler. The team figured that without that, the audience might not follow everything that was being handled by the AI. They also assumed that this was so solidly in the realm of sci-fi that the audience would immediately understand that it was just a futurist concept. There's no way for them to understand the eventual magnitude of these seemingly small creative decisions. After a frantic 6-week production, the day had arrived, and Sculley presented the Knowledge Navigator to the crowd at EduCom.
The someday build is a product called the Knowledge Navigator.
The team had succeeded in creating a vignette that felt not just realistic but plausible. As Alan Kay put it, the question isn't whether the technology is probable, but is this the way we want to use the technology? In the video, we see the professor working from a beautiful office. The Knowledge Navigator's assistant helps him catch up on messages and collaborate remotely on a simulation with a colleague over video chat.
Is this one of your typical last-minute panics for lecture material?
No. That's not until,
The audience ate it up, but EduCom wasn't a press event. A few months later, though, when Jean-Louis Gasset's keynote for Macworld fell through, Apple decided to rerun the Knowledge Navigator film. And this much wider audience was so impressed that rumors began to fly that it was directed by George Lucas and rendered on a Cray supercomputer. The film had achieved its primary goal. Apple had a vision for the next decade. The Knowledge Navigator and various riffs on it would appear again and again and again over the next several years. And inadvertently, it had sparked a new age of corporate speculative fiction as design. From Sun's Starfire, built explicitly as a more scientifically legitimate answer to the Knowledge Navigator, right down to a kind of spatial computing workspace, to AT&T's mysterious and cinematic You Will series of ads.
Borrowed a book from thousands of miles away.
Directed, by the way, by a young, still relatively obscure David
Cross
Fincher.
the country without stopping for directions. You will. It's coming.
One of the major through lines of the Knowledge Navigator was this idea that in the future, AI would assist us, tutoring young children, teaching an adult to read, helping knowledge workers with their research. But here's the critical difference. With HyperCard, you did the navigating. You followed the links, you made the connections yourself. With Knowledge Navigator, the machine would do that for you, handing you conclusions instead of the trail. And not everyone thought this was a good idea. By the mid-90s, the fight was on. In one corner, the believers. Patty Maes at the MIT Media Lab was actually building these interface agents, software that watched what you did and acted on your behalf, but maybe not personified like they were in the Knowledge Navigator. Nicholas Negroponte was evangelizing the digital butler in his book Being Digital. The pitch was simple. Let the machine carry your cognitive load. In the other corner, the skeptics. In 1995, Jaron Lanier, considered the father of virtual reality, fired back with an essay called Agents of Alienation, branding the whole idea both wrong and evil. To Lanier, computers should amplify what humans do directly. An agent that acts for you doesn't free you, it quietly takes your agency away. And he wasn't alone. Don Norman, one of the most respected voices on design, warned that agents could someday run amok, and that beyond just a loss of user control, there were serious privacy and safety concerns. How could a system like the Knowledge Navigator predict what you need if it didn't know everything about you? Every piece of text you'd ever written or read, every message you've sent. But that same year, while the academics argued, the market spoke, and it decided that AI agents were annoying. Microsoft had shipped two products that were very much in the Knowledge Navigator vein. The first was Microsoft Bob. This skeuomorphic UI in some ways evokes the comfortable office of the professor from the film. It also contained actual primitive interface agents or personal guides like Rover the dog, but it was Bob's successor in Microsoft Office that most people remember, Clippy. Clippy's purpose, it seemed, was to constantly interrupt you while you tried to do work. It's kind of a tragic story. Clippy began as part of a Microsoft research project called Lumiere, and apparently it was quite capable in its prototype form. It had this complex Bayesian brain that could predict what the user wanted and make all sorts of interesting decisions, but it didn't tend to pop up a lot, something that the Microsoft executives didn't like. So they ended up shipping a much more stripped down, cruder version that was based on simple rules, and it popped up all the time. It annoyed the crap out of millions and millions of users. For the time being, the market had spoken, and personified agents were out. But the idea never really died. It just went dormant. Today, many of the predictions of the Knowledge Navigator have come true. We carry around portable touchscreen supercomputers in our pockets. I can ask Claude to pull information on any subject for me, and it can leap into action, spawning small copies of itself to comb the internet, and then construct an interactive visualization on almost any subject imaginable. It can deal in abstractions and metaphors. But there's a trade-off between how useful Claude is and how much of my personal information I'm willing to hand over. Microsoft's answer is Recall, which captures a staggering amount of personal data to make its AI more useful, which is almost exactly the bargain the Knowledge Navigator's agent always required. Apple's new Siri AI is betting on a more privacy-first approach. It's taken them more time to get there, but the result is a system where data is ephemeral and disappears as soon as it's processed by private cloud compute. After nearly 40 years of concepts, prototypes, and false starts, including some of Apple's own, Apple might finally be delivering on the promise of the Knowledge Navigator. There's one more thing. These tools can be incredible amplifiers. They can give us the leverage we need to take on even more ambitious work, but cede too much control to the machine, and it will create its own connections and draw its own conclusions. The tools that inspired this story, like the Memex or HyperCard, had a different belief that in the quest for wisdom, the journey itself is the whole point. Thanks for watching, everybody. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like and subscribe. More to come.